They say never judge a book by its cover. But the day I really understood that, I nearly lost everything. It started with a voice, sharp and slicing, cutting through the warm California morning like broken glass. "Sir, are you lost?" This section is reserved for distinguished guests and active duty command. The words dripped with a confidence that nearly bordered on arrogance, slicing through the hum of anticipation at the Navy graduation. The speaker was just a lieutenant commander, young, postured in a uniform so immaculate it looked forged from steel, his mirrored sunglasses blinding in the sun. I was the old man standing in his path, a simple gray suit a touch too loose on my frail frame, an invitation folded tightly in my restless, worn hands. Pale blue eyes, I've been told, with too many stories behind them. I looked up, calm and unhurried, meeting that mirrored gaze. "My invitation says Section A, Row 3, I answered quietly, my voice colored with the softness of old Southern roots. The lieutenant commander, his name tag read Davies, let out a short laugh, barely more than a scoff, as if the whole thing amused him. "Pops, with all due respect, there's probably a mistake. This is the VIP section for BUD/S graduation. You should probably join the other families over in the general bleachers." He didn't really look at me. He was more interested in making sure the right people saw him handling the disturbance. But I stayed still. The roots that carried me here were too deep for a breeze to move. "I'm here for my grandson. He sent this himself," I offered, holding out the invitation. Davies barely glanced at it. I'm sure the boy just got it wrong. His patience was eroding, his tone sharp and biting. "Look, I don't have time to argue. The ceremony starts soon. If you don't move along, I'll have to call security." He stepped forward, his posture intending to intimidate, to remind everyone who was in charge. A few rows away, a young sailor named Miller watched uneasily. His job was event coordination, but his eyes were on Davies and the unwanted attention swirling in the VIP seats. Davies, the fast-tracked star, everyone called him. Miller had heard plenty, sharp as a tack, respected on paper but not exactly overflowing with humility. Miller's gut twisted watching my quiet resolve, knowing respect was supposed to be the Navy's backbone. Yet, here was Davies treating me like I was in the way, like I didn't belong. Davies' voice rose, now performing for whoever might be watching. "What is this? Bring your grandpa to work day?" he barked. "Sir, I'm giving you a direct order to vacate this area." He placed his hand on my shoulder, a move meant to shepherd, but it was rough and disrespectful. As his fingers pressed into my jacket, something subtle shifted in the air, not in me, but around us. My calm seemed to soak up his aggression, leaving him uncertain for the first time. "I served," I said. "No anger, no defense. Simply fact," Davies sneered, regaining his swagger. "I'm sure you did, Pops. Probably a desk job back in the 70s, right? This is the teams. It's different. Now let's go." He pushed down harder, his grip relentless. My jacket sleeve hitched up, revealing part of my arm. Petty Officer Miller's concern turned to alarm. He could feel the line between respectful discipline and open disrespect being crossed. He hesitated, knowing he was venturing into dangerous territory by interfering with someone of Davies's rank. But his conscience burned hotter than his fear. Miller slipped away from his post, phone in hand, dialing a number he'd been told to use only if the Navy's values were in peril. His hands shook as the phone rang, twice, then connected with a voice gruff and authoritative. "Reynolds. Captain Reynolds. Sir, this is Petty Officer Miller at the graduation. Lieutenant Commander Davies is forcing an elderly veteran out of the VIP section, sir. The man looks like he belongs here. Sir, he's being humiliated. I thought you should know." There was a heavy pause, the kind that signals decision. Describe the veteran. Older man, late 70s maybe. Gray suit, clear blue eyes. "He's calm, sir. Very calm." Another pause, longer this time. Is Davies touching him? Yes, sir. He's got his hand on him, pushing him out. Stay there, Miller. I'm on my way. Then the line went dead. Back in Section A, Davies had maneuvered me out into the aisle, a false smile on his face. See? Not so hard, he muttered, motioning for security to escort me. Two guards hesitated, uneasy, yet following orders. The commotion had spooked the front rows, and a hush settled as the unexpected unfolded. That's when everything changed. A sudden sharp blast of a car horn interrupted the tense exchange. Heads turned as a gleaming black sedan, decked in command flags, screeched to a stop along a road where no ordinary vehicle dared to park. The back door swung open with purpose, and from the shadowed interior emerged a figure whose presence was unmistakable even to the most junior sailor. Captain Marcus Reynolds, the man who ran the entire Naval Special Warfare Training Center, stepped out with his trademark air of command. Rumors said he'd been through more missions than most had hot dinners, his face rugged and scarred, testament to years spent on the sharpest edge of danger. The buzz of conversation evaporated. All at once, officers and enlisted alike snapped to attention. Only one man couldn't react, frozen in the middle of it all. Lieutenant Commander Davies fumbled for a salute, face draining of color, his perfect composure suddenly nowhere in sight. "Captain," Davies managed, voice strangled with nerves. "Didn't expect to see you here, sir." But Captain Reynolds didn't acknowledge him with so much as a glance. His hard gaze swept the scene, the security guards standing awkwardly, Davies stiff as a board, and myself left out in the aisle with my invitation in hand. And then, something inexplicable happened. The granite hardness in Reynolds's face melted away. In its place, for the first time, was unmistakable, genuine reverence. He walked straight for me as the sea of uniforms parted. Each purposeful step commanded absolute silence until he stopped just 3 feet away and delivered the sharpest, most precise salute I'd ever witnessed. It was a gesture so sincere, so profound, that I could feel dozens of eyes widen with disbelief. A tremor of awe pulsed through the crowd. "Mr. Collins," Reynolds declared, his voice thick with emotion, "it's an honor, sir. None of us realized you were among us today." I nodded just slightly, my habit to remain humble running deep. "It's been a while, Marcus. Last I saw you, you were just a promising lieutenant." Davies's jaw slackened even further. I could see panic flooding his face as he worked through what he'd just witnessed. "Mr. Collins, why does the base commander know this old nobody?" Captain Reynolds's gaze drifted to my sleeve, still bunched where Davies' careless hand had left it. With a gentleness that demanded respect, Reynolds reached out and pulled my sleeve down, as if restoring the dignity that had just been torn. But not before everyone nearby got a clear look at the faded tattoo that had been exposed on my forearm. The ink was weathered and broken, but the design was unmistakable for those who knew. A serpent coiling around a trident, which speared a skull. Simple beneath, in stark blue, the code, U634. Captain Reynolds stopped short, as if struck in the chest. His breath caught, and for a brief second, he stared at the tattoo as though glimpsing a ghost from a half-remembered nightmare. Only the highest circles had even heard of the symbol. The shadowy legend, the hush word that haunted cafeteria gossip, and the deepest files behind locked doors. "My God," Reynolds uttered, unable to mask his awe. "It's actually you." "The Reapers." He turned, face a thundercloud as he addressed everyone present, though his stony eyes remained fixed on Davies. "Officers, sailors, guests, you think you're here to see a new class of the world's finest warriors graduate? You are, but you're also standing in the presence of the man who created the book they still study." He pointed a firm, trembling finger in my direction. "This is not just Mr. Collins. This is Robert Ghost Collins. Before the SEALs as we know them, before the famous teams, there were men like him, quiet, relentless. He helped build what we call excellence today. He was the backbone of Unit 634, a shadow regiment tasked with missions so secret, not even our history books admit they existed. A jittery silence gripped the crowd, jaws hanging open at every pause. Davies staggered, his confidence finally shattered. Captain Reynolds drew a breath, voice swelling. Some of you may have spotted the Navy Cross tucked inside his jacket. That's just one of 3. The others are locked away, hidden because no one is supposed to know those missions ever happened. He pioneered tactics we still use. Jumping from planes when most called it suicide, crossing lines alone, weeks at a time, with nothing but his rifle, a blade, and nerve you can't teach. His nickname wasn't a joke. To the enemy, he was a ghost. To us, a legend. Turning to Davies, Reynolds' tone thickened with ice. And you? You think your rank earns you the right to put hands on a man like this? Suddenly, the entire graduation seemed to lean forward. Every breath held. Reynolds locked eyes with Davies, his glare cold and unyielding. The whole assembly seemed to shrink, waiting for what would come next. "Lieutenant Commander Davies," he said quietly, each word sharpened like a blade. "Why don't you enlighten us? Tell me in small words what you thought you were doing just now." Davies struggled, voice shaking and all the arrogance gone. "Sir, I believe this man was in a restricted area. His invitation looked... I assumed it was for general seating. I didn't recognize him." Reynolds repeated the word with a dangerous softness. "You assumed. You saw an old man's face and thought he was weak. You saw his suit and thought he was nobody. Is that what the new Navy teaches now? To measure a person by what you think he can offer you, not by what he's already given?" The captain's voice, steady and slow, seemed to echo across the silent bleachers. He reached out with care and pulled my sleeve neatly back down onto my wrist, his tone almost apologetic. "Your sleeve is out of place, sir." But it was too late to hide the tattoo. Dozens of onlookers now stared, whispers rippling as the full legend of what it meant started to dawn on them. Reynolds straightened up, voice rising for everyone to hear. "That tattoo represents a story as old as the SEALs themselves, and far more dangerous. Some of the most secret operations this country has ever undertaken were led, not by men who craved attention, but by men whose names are spoken with quiet respect, and some never spoken at all." He paused, then fixed Davies with a look that made the younger officer visibly tremble. "Lieutenant Commander, the ground you stand on, the respect you enjoy, was earned by the sacrifices of men like Mr. Collins. And you put your hands on him, dismissed him as Pops." For a moment, it was as if time itself stopped. Davies was drained of color, shoulders slumping, and all that bravado melted away, leaving behind only regret and shame. Reynolds didn't flinch. "You are relieved of your command. Effective immediately," he announced, leaving no doubt for the crowd. "Your post as instructor is stripped. You will report to my office at 1400 sharp. I suggest you start thinking about your future because your time in naval special warfare is finished." A sigh escaped from somewhere in the crowd, a subtle but unmistakable release of tension, as if everyone had been wishing for this moment of justice but hadn't dared believe it could arrive. And then, from among the rows of crisp uniforms and proud families, another watcher looked on, my grandson, Andrew Collins. He stood among his graduating peers, his own trident just moments away, and his eyes reflected a storm of emotions: pride, disbelief, awe. To him, I had always just been Grandpa, the man who told old stories and fixed broken fishing rods. Now he was seeing a side of me he'd never imagined existed. As the security team froze in place, stepping respectfully back, and Davies stood there as if hollowed out from the inside, I quietly stepped forward. I looked to Captain Reynolds, whose stern mask softened just a fraction as his eyes met mine. In the hush that followed, I placed a hand on his arm, steady and gentle. "Marcus," I said, my voice low but clear, "the boy is young. He's burning with pride and ambition. That's not a sin in this place. BUD/S is designed to spark that kind of fire. All I ask is, don't crush him for one mistake. Show him where to channel his energy. Let this be a lesson, nothing more. For the second time that hour, an entire crowd learned something new. Not about warfare or honor, but about forgiveness. Reynolds blinked, then nodded with a slow respect that spoke louder than words. As you wish, Mr. Collins. He turned to Davies, who stood silent, awaiting his fate. You're lucky, Reynolds growled, that Mr. Collins is far more merciful than I would have been. You won't return as an instructor. Instead, you'll take up post at the Naval Archives, Washington. For the next year, your mission is to study the unfiltered histories of men like him. You'll write on everyone, and maybe, just maybe, you'll begin to understand that this uniform is a privilege, not a right. Davies tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. All he could do was nod, face pale, eyes downcast. Now get out of my sight, Reynolds finished, each syllable final as a judge's gavel. Shame draped over Davies as he turned and walked away, the weight of his mistake dragging on every step. The spell broke, and carefully, quietly, Reynolds reached for my shoulder, guiding me to the seat of honor at the very front, where sun and shadow both illuminated the respect that now filled the air. The attention of the entire graduation now shifted. I was no longer invisible, no longer just an elderly shadow. As Reynolds led me down the aisle, conversation ceased, and even the sharpest whispers fell away. Every eye followed our progress, and for a moment, history itself seemed to unfold in the vivid sunlight. The old and the new walked side by side. He guided me to my seat, right in the heart of the front row, placing me gently in the spot destined for the day's most honored guest. I gazed out, the enormity of the moment pressing against my chest, waves of memory lapping quietly within me. For so long, my duty had been lived in silence. I never dreamed that silence would someday shatter before so many. The ceremony soon began, but the atmosphere had shifted in a way no one could have predicted. The air felt thick with reverence, pirates of the past and winds of legacy swirling among the seats. This event was no longer solely about the hopeful future of the teams. It was now just as much about honoring the sacrifice and mysteries of their sacred foundation. Names were called, medals glinted in the sun, and proud graduates marched one by one across the stage. Among them, tall, steady, and blinking back emotion, was my grandson, Andrew. Barely a man, and yet in this hour, I could see the weight of generations settling onto his shoulders. His name echoed from the podium. Andrew Collins! The sound rang out crisp and proud. He stepped forward, received his coveted trident, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes met. His wide and shining, mine steady, full of all that I'd carried for so many years. In that silent look, 1,000 words were spoken. He no longer saw just Grandpa, the familiar hand that taught him to tie a lure and set a fire. Now he saw the sum of a life built on sacrifices invisible to the world. A man who'd quietly wrestled with shadows and survived. I watched as he clasped hands with his instructors and took his place beside his fellow SEALs. I remembered teaching him how to mend a leaky boat, how to wait for the fish to bite, and how to face the anger in his chest on days when patience seemed impossible. He had wanted to be a hero, not knowing that true heroism stands silent and humble. When the ceremony ended, the crowd began to thin, and the autumn sun dipped lower, casting long golden arms across the shore. The air brimmed with salt and the sound of distant waves, a natural hush falling over the departing families. Andrew found me by the exit, not as the boy who left home, but as the man he'd become. We walked together along the path by the ocean's edge, seagulls wheeling overhead and the last rays of daylight bathing the world in a warm, forgiving light. He was quiet at first, hands deep in his uniform pockets, as if the words were too heavy to lift. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick, barely a whisper. "Grandpa? Why? All those years I told you I wanted to be just like the stories, like the heroes from my books. But you never told me what you'd done." We stopped to watch the waves break just beyond the rocks. I looked out toward the horizon, letting the stillness fill the space between his question and my answer. I put a weathered, calloused hand on his shoulder, the same shoulder Davies had gripped in anger just hours earlier. My grip, though, was gentle and unwavering. "Son, it was never about medals or stories. It's about the work, the person beside you. When it all ends, you'll learn. The quietest ones in the room sometimes carry the loudest histories. They don't talk about it because they lived it. That's all." I squeezed his shoulder, the truth settling there. Not as a burden, but as a ballast for the future. "Remember this, Andrew, when you lead your own men one day. Substance is always greater than show. The loudest man rarely has the biggest story. Serve because it's right, not because you want applause." He nodded, eyes wet and shining, the lesson burrowing deeply into the corners of his heart. We continued along the sand, nothing left but the music of wind and surf. I could sense his mind racing, tumbling the day's revelations over and over. He had his badge now, the world's respect maybe for a moment, but more importantly, he'd inherited something almost no one gets, a true legacy, and the wisdom to carry it with humility. Behind us, on the grounds where tradition and ambition had collided, the story would be retold and whispered about for years. Officers who'd believed they'd seen it all were now reminded that greatness often walks quietly among them, in unassuming suits and gentle smiles. Davies' shame would not be forgotten, not out of spite, but as a caution. Humility matters more than the cut of your jacket or the medals on your chest. As the sky darkened and the stars began to prick the velvet dusk, I understood for the first time that perhaps my silence had served a purpose. The world didn't need another story of bravado. It needed reminders of character, of endurance, and of forgiveness. And so, arm in arm, Andrew and I made our way back to where the lights of the city flickered on, a new seal and an old one, both changed by a long day, both standing on a foundation built long ago, when words were few and deeds were everything. The evening faded as Andrew and I slowly made our way back toward the now empty parade ground, both lost in thought. I could sense his internal struggle, the longing to ask more, to fill the silence with questions about dangerous raids, impossible missions, the unspoken cost of a life lived on the razor's edge. I smiled quietly, knowing that those stories, the ones people hungered for, were far less important than the lesson he'd just learned. We stopped by a row of benches that overlooked the bay, the last flecks of sunlight glinting off the water. Andrew sat beside me, elbows on his knees, his deep breaths matching the rhythm of the waves. For a time, neither of us spoke. We watched as sailors and their families drifted away, laughter and accomplishment trailing on the wind. The sharp shouts of earlier had softened to the distant flutter of seagulls settling in for the night. Eventually, Andrew found his voice again. "Did you ever want people to know?" He asked it without accusation, with only curiosity. "Everything you did, the things Captain Reynolds spoke about, didn't you ever want to share it?" I thought for a long moment, the question echoing across my memory. There were times, I suppose, when I wished someone understood. When the memories were heaviest, it would have helped to speak. But in this life, sometimes the best service is invisible. The work gets done. The world keeps spinning. And that's enough. Those who need to know always find out. Usually, it's not until years later when something like today happens. Andrew nodded, understanding beginning to blossom. The words sat with him, heavy but right. He looked at me, and his expression changed, more reverent, even a touch uncertain. "Were you ever scared?" he said quietly. "All those stories." I smiled, allowing the memory to flicker behind my eyes. Of course I was scared. Any man who claims otherwise is lying to you, or to himself. Bravery isn't not feeling fear. It's doing what needs to be done in spite of it. Sometimes I was terrified. I just learned to tuck it away and focus on the job, to trust the men beside me more than any plan or weapon. That trust, that's what keeps you alive, and it's what turns a collection of individuals into a team. He drew in a slow breath, digesting every word, understanding not just the deeds, but the spirit behind them. I want to lead that way, he said, voice stronger. Not for medals, not just for the glory. I want to make the people around me better because I showed up for them. Hearing him say that, I felt a warmth fill my chest, a welling of pride that had nothing to do with badges or titles. We sat a while longer, letting the dark truly settle and the world quiet down. At some point, Andrew bumped my shoulder gently with his own. Grandpa, I don't think I ever realized just how much you did. For the country, for the family, for me. I always looked up to you, but now it's more than that. I want to be someone you're proud of. I chuckled softly and gave his hand a strong squeeze. You already are, son, I told him. You always were. Not for what you did today, but for the man you choose to become every single day. That's the only thing that lasts in the end, the person you are when no one's looking and no one's giving a speech. A silence rested between us again, this one peaceful, the kind that signals real understanding. Eventually, we both stood. The city's lights gleamed across the water, calling everyone home. I looked over at Andrew, standing tall in his dress uniform, trident shining over his heart, eyes holding a newfound depth. He looked ready to walk into a future guided by more than ambition. He was carrying the strength of humility, the weight of legacy, and the promise to lead with compassion. As we left the benches behind, I let my thoughts drift to the others. Heroes I'd known whose names would never be called at a ceremony, whose stories would go unspoken, but whose sacrifices shaped everything. Their memory lived not in words or medals, but in the values passed down to people like Andrew. In that, I found a peace deeper than any applause. Walking into the gentle embrace of night, with a grandson who finally understood, I realized, the greatest measure of a life well lived was not in what you claimed for yourself, but in what you inspired in others. In humility, in kindness, in the quiet dignity of honest work, done for no other reason than it needed doing. And in that, there is a legacy greater than any fame.